merchandise export from India scheme and other export incentives challenged by the US at the World Trade Organization beyond March 31st, as it is worried that replacing the existing schemes could hurt exports. The Foreign Trade Policy 2020-2025 to be announced in the new fiscal may continue many of the old schemes with some adjustment in rates, according to a Business Line report. With exports showing a decline so far this year, there is a growing feeling amongst policymakers that the boat should not be rocked further. India's exports declined almost 2% to $239.29 billion in April-December 2019, with most labor-intensive sectors contracting. Once growing at over 20%, powering India's economic growth, India's exports have been stuck at around $300 billion for the last one decade. Indian industry has often played safe, content with the domestic demand and unwilling to upgrade technology or standards to match global levels. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will take a closer look at the exports sector and analyze what to expect from the budget. Joining me on the program today are Deepshika Sikarwar, Senior Editor of The Economic Times, S.K. Jindal, Chairman, Investment and Capital Markets, ASSOCHAM, and Ajay Dua, former Secretary, Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Jindal, let me begin the program with you. As far as exports are concerned, what is it that has ensured that our exports have not grown the way we would have liked to see them grow?
You're absolutely right, but the thing is that when you look at the larger picture in the country, the whole economy is not stable. Export figures itself also, you will see big fall or increase year after year when we see the growth or decline on the previous year figures. So what we need to do is work hard on this, because this is a very, very important aspect of economy. No country has ever done big without doing big on the export side. So on domestic front, if you are only looking after the domestic front alone, it doesn't work so well. For India, it must, and it is inevitable that you should look after your exports in a way that it is best suited for our country, and we have growth year after year. The figures are so surprising that any year it can be 30% down, any year it can be 18% up, like that. So we need to work very, very hard. We have to increase manufacturing in the country to a greater extent, and like earlier we were thinking in terms of cheap labor and all. All those things have also been lost in the recent past because of this Bangladesh garment thing. They have taken over our exports, which were working very well because of the cheap labor we had. So now we need to think in real terms of modernization, upgradation, innovation. All these things needs to be looked into, worked with a hard discipline, and hard work is required to sustain stability in exports.
Okay, we need stability in exports is what you're suggesting. What needs to be done, Deepshika Sikarwar, so as to ensure that we get this kind of stability in exports?
So, see Frank, there are a number of things which have sort of played on the export story, if you see. Till 2008, the Indian export sector was getting a lot of help from the global economy, which was booming. After 2008, the global economy has been wobbly. So, obviously, it impacted the domestic exports. But even when the global economy showed some signs of improvement, Indian export sector did not gain that much. Now, there are multiple issues that plague the sector. A, our transaction costs are very high. There are logistic issues. Then our currency itself makes our exports incompetitive. You know, we have a very strong currency. And other countries have incentivized their export sector tremendously with tax incentives, with power incentives. As also, if you look at some countries also, you know, have this currency, they depreciate their currency, which has helped their exports. And also, we've not been able to achieve the scales in manufacturing sector. The large scales which are required, you know, which would bring down our cost of production and so on. So, we need a holistic policy now for export sector, as in a stable, like Mr. Jindal said, we need stability. Agriculture, we could have sort of encouraged export. We keep changing the policy. One day we will allow an export to happen, other day we'll put a ban on the export sector. So we need to start looking at the cost of carrying out exports for the export sector, how we can bring down the cost, how we can make it easy for them to carry out exports. Also, there needs to be a bit of aggressiveness, more aggressiveness on part of industry, as also help from the government side, the support from the government side, that we identify markets and we actually encourage industry to go out and tap those markets like other countries do. And we should incentivize them to do it. In terms of taxation also, we have limited fiscal space to give benefits, but we need to look at other forms of incentives for the sector.
Okay, all right. A couple of points that I'd like to take forward with you, Mr. Dua. You know, one, of course, talking about how we've not been competitive enough as far as our manufacturing is concerned, and hence it has impacted our exports. Have we lost an opportunity to a country like a Bangladesh and say for a Vietnam, because we were the leader as far as textiles were concerned, but now we are languishing and we are, you know, they have gone ahead of us. So has an opportunity been lost as well?
Let me take up the second point, which you talked about specifically about garments and clothing items. Certainly, this was we were the leaders in this, but ever since Bangladesh in particular, and subsequently Vietnam for some time, they were treated as least developed countries. These LDC status of theirs gave them advantages of market access with almost zero tariffs in certain parts of the world, particularly in Europe and in the American continent. That kept up their exports of garments as well as leather goods. Having said that, now let's look at what has come in the way of India. I would say one, ours being no longer eligible for LDC benefits. Second, and I would consider that as a major disadvantage, the flexibility in employment of labor, which is available in Bangladesh as well as in Vietnam. We do not have it. And this is at a time when the real wages, if you compare in terms of purchasing power, purchasing parity, is much lower in Bangladesh and Vietnam than here. Even then, the regulatory system or the framework allows them to hire and fire. There was very recently, a few months ago, threats of strikes in Bangladesh in this garment sector with respect to the low wages which were being paid. And guess where did the government go? Government sided with the employers. Help them out vis-a-vis their continuing the policy rather than going with the trade unions or their workers. Vietnam, I think Vietnam is actually a real challenge for us because it's combining not only diligence of a very high order plus the wage advantage, but also ability to design and ability to kind of market itself very aggressively compared to even Bangladesh. Going forward, I see Vietnam as a competitor for us, not merely in textiles, garments, but also in a whole lot of manufacturing products.
Right.
Now you raised earlier the question about where are we heading in exports? What about our competitiveness? Absolutely. We used to be competitive in labor intensive items for reasons just mentioned. We are losing out there, of which I will flag labor flexibility of hiring and firing as one very leading cause. Second is our inability to achieve the scales. The volumes of production actually help you to cut costs. We have not, I don't think anywhere, we've been achieving that. The moment a person crosses a particular threshold limit, he sets up another unit in order to remain a small or a medium enterprise or a micro enterprise, rather than expand and get the advantages of scale. The rest of the issues which have been impacting our exports, Deepshika has very elaborately mentioned them, be it our currency, be it the incentives of transaction and logistics.
Right.
If our average cost is 14% in logistics and our competitors is 5 or 6, you see the disadvantage, clear cut there. So we have to be and then of course I would say our interest rates make, be it with respect to working capital or term capital, make us much costlier than elsewhere in the world.
Right. Okay. Taking the discussion forward now, Mr. Jindal, at some level, do you believe that the industry is also to blame because of the lack of the go-getter kind of attitude that we require as far as exports are concerned? Because the industry has relatively been safe, content with catering or playing to the domestic markets.
No, I will say the ecosystem as a whole is not really very robust and very serious. It needs, when you are talking about your business, one has to be serious. Nowadays, only fittest can survive. So international markets will not let you survive if you are not doing according to what is required. You see, systems needs to be simplified. There are a lot of difficulties in the system itself, like refund of your duties, customs, tax refunds, incentives, GST refund. All these things, they cause such a havoc. You may not get your refunds for 1 year, 2 years. And how can you handle your cash flows when such large amount of refunds are stuck with the government with no payment of interest? You have to incur interest because you are paying to your bank every day. So all these things, they disrupt the whole system, and they tell people don't enter into export market. I don't think more people are coming into exports now because of so many difficulties they are facing in getting their own money back. GSTs you have already paid and you want it back. Your money you will get it back after a year or 2. Then also you should be thankful to the government that they have given it back to you. So this kind of situation will not let export grow. They need some help, like our labor laws, Mr. Dua said, and our interest rates, they are permanent hurdles. Government needs to be, like, they are serious about ease of doing business. They should be serious about ease of doing exports also. Exports needs to be eased, then only it can happen. We are very, very uncompetitive in the world market, which is visible from the situation that we have not been able to get the stability until now. Every year we see different picture. It should not be like that. Then unfortunately now at this stage, international markets are also not in favor just now. So we need to do innovations, we need to do research, we need to do lot of things, then only we can survive. This is my take on export. I have been active into export for last 45 years and I have seen them happening myself. So I find one has to be serious about business. Now you cannot continue without being serious.
Okay, all right. So Deepshika, as far as FTAs are concerned, how important is it for us to get some of our big FTAs in place, maybe with Europe, maybe with some other groupings, and do you see that happening anytime in the near future, and how is it going to contribute and what kind of an impact is it going to have on exports?
I'm glad you asked this question, Frank, because one more issue where I find that industry has sort of not shown the aggressiveness that it should have shown is the FTAs. So our imports under the most of our FTAs has grown, but our exports have not really sort of benefited that much. So while we are undertaking a review of, say ASEAN FTA, and we are also looking at other FTAs, there is a fresh thinking, after what happened at RCEP, and India sort of, decided not to sort of ink it then, that we should look at US or we should look at EU, which are our key export markets. Because these are the countries, these are the groups where we want to sell our products. So we should have FTAs with these countries. So while talks have started, with EU, talks have been going on for many years, but we've not sort of reached there. But hopefully, government looks very serious this time, and they're very keen also that we should sort of move forward in these markets. So hopefully we should see something, but it may not happen immediately. It's going to take time because these negotiations do take time.
Okay, all right. So, Mr. Dua, just talk to us about the importance really as far as the export sector is concerned and its contribution to the GDP, because when the Indian economy was doing well, when we saw almost double-digit growth, exports were doing wonderfully well at that time as well, over 20% and so on and so forth. So what's the contribution of the export sector as far as the GDP and the economy is concerned as a whole?
First, now down to 13%. If our GDP is $2.7 trillion, our 300, barely 300, or even less than that, it doesn't. You've dropped it by a third. Second, I would say you brought in a degree of uncertainty which was not there earlier, at least with respect to three sectors of the economy. The one was clothing, leather, I'm putting it one. Second was gems and jewelry. We are a very big exporter in that sector. And third was our light engineering goods. I think we are lost. Light engineering goods included a whole lot of things. That space we have lost to the Chinese. Gems and jewelry probably to a number of countries, but also I understand that the market has somewhat shrunk for the so-called artificial, I wouldn't call it artificial, but for these gems and jewelry per se, because the world is not growing at that fast. This is a discretionary spend, and with respect to, we've discussed about clothing and others. Advantage of exports is one, of course, very clearly funding our imports and adding to the stability of your currency. We see that our imports are fairly inflexible, inelastic to price, largely because they constitute a large amount of it is fuel, crude, oil and gas, and now even thermal coal apart from the met coal. So I'm clubbing that here. A lot of minerals. We are not a mineral-rich country. We may be having reserves of coal, yet we import 200 odd million tons of thermal coal. We import almost everything of which we need for our, say, all our copper requirement, copper concentrate and others we import. We import zinc, and of course whole lot of rare earths. There was a time, and thank God for it, I would say, we moved out of importing food. We used to spend our valuable money on there also, but the other F continues. Fertilizer imports are still large. So these are, and of course, capital goods, machinery, I should not be ignoring, because that's a large one. One, we need to be cutting down on the imports if it is possible. We've had respite from it for 6 or 7 years with respect to the prices of crude, international prices. So crude and fertilizers, the burden came less. But I see no reason why at those points of time also our import bill doesn't come down, because we suddenly relaxed the rules for import of gold. Gold has constituted a fair amount of our import basket. And now, as the discussion is going on in the government, the Commerce Minister has been talking about it, that an item called others is $100 billion worth is an item called others, and thousands of items for which there is no specific classification, our commodity code. They come under that and they get the benefit of low tariffs. We certainly need to see whether we need them, and if we do need them, how can we check whether tariff and non-tariff barriers can be put for specific items there. Small scale industry in India is a very major, large exporter of various commodities which it makes. And we know that small industry is the one which create more jobs than the formal and the large sector. Having said that, I would say for us, another very labor intensive item, and which we have so far enjoyed an advantage, is our software exports. It's highly labor intensive. We've been exporting those, and of course now there was a time when we all thought that the Chinese don't know English, so they can't compete with us, and we would be the exporters of human software. I think that advantage is going away. So I would think the point which you earlier asked my co-panelists, FTAs are needed. Let's not, we may not have joined one because we were not ready, and there is a clear fear, apprehension of what China might do to us, because China has greater cost competitiveness, greater aggressiveness in terms of exports, etc. We should be looking at it as a temporary phenomena before we actually join even RCEP.
Right.
During this period, building up our competitiveness. But the new problem is that with the United States, once an ally of yours in trade, it might be still a strategic ally, etc., they are the ones who are dragging you to WTO and elsewhere by saying that your export subsidy regime is in violation of the international norms.
Sure. Okay, all right. Closing comments now from all my guests with the expectations from the budget. The budget is almost upon us. What do you expect from the budget as far as the export sector is concerned, Mr. Jindal?
I would expect that they should be looking at how to provide stable policy for exports. If our own economy in the country is not doing very well, to expect export will do very well is really not realistic. They should be thinking in realistic terms. Refund of taxes, all those things are very, very important. They should not consider that exporter will export and forget about the taxes. Taxes, the quantum is 20%, 18%, 25%. He cannot survive with those kind of cash flows that he is paying taxes on his interest on his own money, and he can survive. He cannot survive. So he'll rather stop the export and look for domestic angle. And simplification is also very important, because if they simplify, the cost gets reduced. If they don't simplify, cost enhance. They should be looking at it. Simplification is very, very important. They should let loose things happen. That will create, for example, MSME, if you give them some flexibility, they will be able to create lot of jobs, which is our need. So all those things are, if we promote export, they have solution for many other problems for us. So we should be doing that rather than giving cash incentives or losing money on that account. We should simplify the things for exporters so that they are able to do it at lesser cost for themselves, and to make them competitive in the world. Now the formalities, the procedures are so complicated, not everybody can afford it.
Right. Deepshika, expectations?
So I do hope, there have been talks about, coming out with some sort of a scheme which will allow, cheaper credit to exporters, not just rupee credit, but also dollar credit, because exporters are going out, so they need cheaper funds to go out. Also, some sort of stability where special economic zones are concerned. Now, there is a lot of uncertainty whether, the scheme is going to continue, what kind of benefits will be there or not. So, also provide some sort of certainty to the special economic zone scheme. Also, the tax neutralization scheme. I mean, we are yet to see the exact contours of what scheme is going to come out instead of MEIS. While, for textiles and apparel, MEIS has been extended. Now, there is talk that it will benefit will continue for the telecom sector as well. But let's have clarity on the scheme. So hopefully the budget will sort of bring out these things, you know.
Right. And Mr. Dua, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
I think the budget should make a lump sum provision for pulling up the exports from the country, and the trade policy which follows should be spelling out some of the details of how this budget allocation would be utilized. I say this because now anything which is to be done, we have to look at the allegation against us which has been held about MES and our subsidizing our exports which are not compliant with the WTO. Not yet effective because the dispute panel is no longer there. So if the dispute panel is not in position, the order doesn't become final. So we've received some respite from the WTO. The emphasis going forward could be creating special infrastructure which is, I think, WTO compliant for exports. Be it fast-tracked berths at the airport, be it as was mentioned there, special logistics facilities, railway wagons, all priority, etc., which we are saying we run it for everybody. It's not just for exports. If you are going to Mumbai or if you're going to a particular port, we have a special kind of an infrastructure. Those things probably may not cost so much as they may reduce the cost and offset if at all there is any reduction to be done with respect to the MEIS and other subsidies which are being questioned.
Right. Okay. All right then. On that note, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Those were the expectations from the experts as far as the budget is concerned on the export sector. Thank you, gentlemen and lady, for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.